Whether you're approaching your 30s, 40s, 50s, or are well into your later years, you're likely experiencing big and little health changes that may make your life seem messy and out of balance. Yet all too often, we don't get the caring medical attention we deserve and need. This can have a huge impact on everything from body image and mood to physical health and relationships. And if you add perimenopause and menopause into the mix, things can get tricky and even more challenging. Today, I'm joined by a wise and wonderful functional medical practitioner who knows how messy life and health can be. This very special guest offers uplifting, practical solutions to help you be your best self at every age and life stage. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real-life question. I'm 34 and dealing with perimenopause already. It affects everything from my focus at work to my sex drive. It's killing my relationship with my fiance. I just can't get into sex at all. Not to be dramatic, but my skin is sagging more every day. It's not just my face, it's my arms, legs, neck, thighs, all of me. I've never been overweight, but I've added a few pounds in the last year. And the worst part is the mood swings, but the hot flashes aren't pretty either. My doctor said it'll get better, but that's no help. My friends don't understand because it hasn't hit them yet. My self-confidence is in the toilet. Do you have any feel-good tips? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love. Please note, as this episode may contain sensitive information, listener discretion is advised. If you need further information, please see the show notes.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are imperfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I am joined by a wonderful special guest, Carrie Levine. Carrie is a functional medicine practitioner and the author of Whole Women Health, a guide to creating wellness for any age and stage. Welcome to the podcast, Carrie. It's such a joy to have you with us today.
Oh, it's a joy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, before we launch into the topic of today's podcast, the big subject matter, which is really interesting and broad, could you tell our listeners just a little bit about what makes you, you?
Oh my goodness, what an interesting question. What makes me me? Probably my serious, contemplative, quiet way of being with others and with myself.
I love that. Serious, contemplative, and quiet. Beautiful. You know, contemplative is something that we can certainly use more in the realm of health and wellness. So thank you for that beautiful backdrop. Now, as we move into this listener's question, which I love it because and I chose it and paired it with you because it addresses so many issues that regardless of how somebody, is, whatever age bracket they're in, there are pieces of it that we can all learn something from. And the idea of skin not doing what we want it to do and sex drive not doing what we hope it will do or wish it would do or a partner wishes, and weight gain, all of these issues and mood swings. My goodness, there's a lot to unpack here. So before we jump into that piece, you are a functional medicine practitioner. Could you explain to listeners what that means so that it can really absorb what a great approach it is, how it gets to the root of things rather than just looking at the superficial elements that somebody might see or feel?
Yeah, absolutely. So, functional medicine is a systems biology approach to chronic disease and illness. And what that means is that people who practice functional medicine are looking at the ways in which things are interconnected. There's a great meme that says everything is connected to everything, as opposed to a conventional medical model. Instead of looking at symptoms sort of in silos, the way conventional medicine silos health issues. So, if you have a mood issue, you might see a psychologist. If you have a weight issue, you might see an endocrinologist. If you have a digestive issue, you might see a gastroenterologist. From a systems approach, all of those symptoms may have a common thread that's rooted in biochemistry. And so my job, or people who practice functional medicine's job, is to find the underlying physiology that's driving the symptoms. And with the understanding that everything is connected to everything. So an example of that is skin eruptions like an eczema or psoriasis often have a gut related component because the home of the immune system happens to be in the gut. And people don't necessarily think what they eat or the health of their gut microbiome has anything to do with their skin. So there's just a little example of what how functional medicine connects seemingly unrelated symptoms and can work to help rebalance physiology so people actually have relief, as opposed to just prescribing one medication for that symptom, another medication for that symptom, another medication for that symptom. And then the other piece that I love most, well, there's a couple pieces that I love about functional medicine, but one is that in general, functional medicine practitioners lean heavy on nutrition and lifestyle. So there's a lot of talk about how are people living, how are they sleeping, how are they moving, how are their relationships, and that is part of the dialogue. And then at the core of the model is really mind, body, spirit. So there's a little bit of in the room for that aspect of health, which is dear to my heart.
My goodness, I'm all in. It sounds fabulous. And being a body, mind, spirit person myself, this is definitely a podcast I'm going to thoroughly enjoy and learn from. You're already saying things that I'm just saying, oh, tell me more, but I will try and stay on topic. And so could you explain when you're talking about, and when we look at the gut, that enteric nervous system, everything that's in the gut and how important that is, could you explain more about that? Because we often think of the gut as just the stomach, just the intestines, and we don't realize, as you're saying, something like eczema or psoriasis, sure, the doc is you have eczema on your face, or, I have a friend who has, a skin issue and they're giving him a cream to put on it. And the cream is just the regular drugstore type of cream that you'll get with a prescription. And I'm not going to go into that piece, except to say it's creating just a topical treatment. So when he stops using that medication, it flares up again. And so from what you're saying, which is really right up my alley, there's something going on in his system that would need to be adjusted to clear it up and give him relief in short term and, more important, long term. Did I get that right?
Yeah, 100%. So you're speaking to sort of another meme within functional medicine, which is functional medicine is root cause medicine. And I might say root causes, because very rarely is there one thing that's driving somebody's health issue. I talk about the gut as Grand Central Station, because if the gut is not functioning optimally, it's not possible to have health at all. Because it is the home of inflammation, it is the home of the immune system, it is the home of neurotransmitter production, neurotransmitters being hormones that affect mood like serotonin and GABA. And so inflammation is something that drives many, many, many health issues, right? Inflammation may drive muscle pain, joint pain, fatigue, depression. It might not just be gas, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, but it's there as well. It can be itching. It can be skin issues. It can be hormone imbalance. And so there's over 100 trillion organisms that live in our intestines, and they are supposed to be there. So the fact that they're there isn't necessarily the problem. The problem arises when the environment is such that some of those organisms that are potentially disease producing can proliferate, or there's not enough good bacteria to keep the offensive line of the immune system strong. And it's fascinating to me. One of the things that I'm noticing most clinically lately, and let me just give listeners some context. I have a very small practice in Mid-Coast Maine. I take care of only women, and I am primarily cash. So already people who see me for the most part are self-selected, right? Their baseline level of health is, I would say, above average. And many people find me because they've been to the and they haven't gotten the help that they have wanted. And still, when they do a stool test and we look at the bacterial colonization in their gut microbiome, the good bacteria is really low. And it's not something I totally understand because in general, the women that I take care of, it's not their first rodeo. You know, they're largely engaged with their health and they're doing what they can to the best of their ability, which does not mean being perfect. But they know vegetables are probably good for them. Too much sugar probably isn't awesome for them. Too much alcohol, you know, like they bring a sort of some understanding of nutrition and overall health to the table, and still the beneficial bacterial colonization is really low. And the clinical term for that is insufficiency dysbiosis. And I am stymied and I don't know what's driving that. My best guesses about it. So like in general, the things that generally would compromise our gut microbiome are eating food that's inflammatory for us. And that could be things that are good for us. So it could be chicken, it could be kale, it could be almonds. You know, once we sort of eliminate the processed food, eating too much of even foods that are good for us can be too much. Medications, so any pharmaceutical is going to affect the health of the gut microbiome. Lipopolysaccharides, which are chemicals that are present when there's high levels of bacteria, like potentially disease-producing bacteria. But the wild card that I am most fascinated with right now is stress. Because of the two-lane highway between the brain and the gut, called the vagus nerve, and that highway being bidirectional, meaning stress can be real or perceived, and that will affect the gut microbiome, and or the gut microbiome will affect our depression, anxiety, energy, those kinds of things. And so this finding that this prevalence of insufficiency dysbiosis at this time in this population really makes me wonder, what is the impact of stress on our physiology and our health? That would have been more than what you were asking.
I think, I think it's such a perfect place to start. Such a perfect place to start, because regardless of how old someone is, we're seeing so much stress in elementary school kids, teens, people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. It tends to drop off a little bit more for people in their 60s and 70s, but we're seeing so much stress, whether it's about politics, environment, relationships, disconnection, loneliness, whatever is causing somebody stress, whatever is contributing to that. And people think that all of the anxiety that's welling up in the world is normal, and it's not. And we have this heightened stress response where, as you know, our stress response is intended atavistically to be something that arises when we are threatened by a lion, tiger, bear, intruder, and then we address the threat, and then we go on and we live our normal life. Parasympathetic nervous system comes on board. We chug along. We're doing great. No stress in general until another intruder alert like that. And today, people are feeling stressed from every direction. Again, whether it's the greater world, whether it's their relationships, whether it's posts they're seeing on social media that are scaring them, or they're comparing themselves, all of these stressors. So it makes sense that even as much privilege as we may have in many areas, we have a lot of stressors coming from not just the internal world, but the external world. And my sense too is that there's a lack of community. We no longer have mom living, in the house next door, around the corner, grandma there to watch the kids, parents, one parent at home can really focus on what the kiddo might need. And I'm not saying that a parent should be at home, but the point is, many people, they're very alone and very isolated. And all of this can raise our levels of cortisol. And cortisol is not good for our systems in the long term. So please, before we get to the listener's question, could you just talk about that piece about the stress response and why it works against physical health, mental health as well?
Yeah, I mean, I sort of alluded to it already in that real or perceived stress. And I think it's really important to identify that, the stress can be the tiger or it can be thinking about the tiger if that's stressful for you to think about, right? So there's a real calling to do what we can cognitively to keep our thoughts quiet or peaceful so that we're not contributing to what's happening in the world around us. And that message is going to travel through the vagus nerve to our gut microbiome and change the colonization of who's there and who's growing and who's not. And then that becomes sort of one of the, or part of the physiologic basis for an endless number of things. And whether that's irritable bowel or chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia or joint pain or muscle pain or eczema or depression or anxiety, it's central. That vagus nerve highway is central to our overall well-being. And then the other part that I find many women not aware of is the HPA-TG axis, right? And so the way in which our brain, our thyroid, our ovaries, and our adrenals, the primary producers of cortisol and other stress hormones like epinephrine and norepinephrine, and another hormone called DHEA, which is the precursor to testosterone, which is the precursor to estrogen. All of those organs are interrelated, and what's happening in one affects the whole loop. So when I talk with women about stress, particularly when we're talking about hormone balance, which will segue us into your listener's question, that axis is crucial and always in communication. And so there's a natural shift that happens with midlife, right? When ovarian hormone production starts to slow down, then there's going to be a preferential burden to the thyroid and the adrenals, which is part of why there's so much hypothyroidism midlife for women that pops up midlife, because that whole axis again is trying to adapt to what's happening. And also why our resilience in terms of rebounding from stress declines, because that shift in ovarian hormones already is putting a lot on the adrenals. And typically by midlife, when that ovarian hormone production starts to shift and change, women haven't necessarily been super awesome to their adrenals and to managing stress. We typically have been, growing careers or caring for families or not taking the best care of ourselves for whatever the reasons. And when that ovarian hormone production starts to shift, the system can't always adapt, or there's a lot of turbulence that happens as the system tries to adapt. And it's so important in my mind that women understand the intersection of stress and hormone balance, because I have seen women, not unlike your listener, be in perimenopause, and then as they have tended to their lives and to the stress in their lives and taken slightly better care of themselves, some of the symptoms abate. They abate because the whole loop is not pressed and stressed.
Makes perfect sense. Again, you're looking at the whole system, not just saying, oh, okay, it's onset of perimenopause. And it sounds like this person's doctor said, hey, just, wait it out or it'll get better. Don't worry. And you're saying, wait, if we learn to soothe the system, to calm down the system and really start to work with the full circle of what's happening, then some of this person's symptoms may naturally abate. Now I have a question for you. Let's look at, with this individual, I know you can't give medical advice to a specific person, so we're looking globally. What would you say about what they're experiencing, whether it's, I know there's a lot to address, but it sounds like there's mood, focus issues, sagging skin, a little bit of weight gain, low sex drive. What would you offer, several key tips that they could look at and begin to make changes in their life? Other than, of course, lowering stress. So feel free to focus on that issue as well.
Yeah. For this particular listener, the first thing that caught my attention was her age of 34. And I think that age of onset really requires a thorough medical evaluation to make sure that there's not something else endocrinologically going on. So the sort of guidelines are any sort of hormone shifting that happens after the age of 35 is thought to be quote unquote normal. Prior to that is a little bit of a, do we need to rule out some other things here? So that's my first qualifier, would be like a full medical workup to make sure that there's nothing else going on. Once we were sure that all of that was normal, absolutely the starting base for conversation for me all the time is stress. 100%. Like, how are you living? What does work look like? How many hours a week are you working? Does that feel good in your body? Does it feel like too much? Does it feel like you have to because you need to for the money? Do you have enough time off? Do you have enough time in a day to take care of yourself? Some people leave for work at 6 and get home at 6. And so where in that work day is somebody exercising, goofing off, relaxing, having time for food preparation, seeing the light of day even, right? And so that is part of the conversation. What is the situation at home? What does that look like? Do you want to be there? Do you not want to be there? Does it feel like a healthy environment? And then from there, once we've sort of...
Can I just pause right here?
Please.
That is so rich already.
Yeah.
I like how you looked at, hey, if you're working, whether it's 6 to 6, 7 to 7, 8 to 6, whatever it might be, I love how you said, how does that feel to you? Because there are certain people where working 12-hour days feels good. They don't feel stressed from it. They have different needs, and they may get exactly what they need in the evening, and they may sleep really well, or maybe they don't need a ton of sleep. They may have great relaxation on the weekends, and for them, that will work. Yet for somebody else, working from 7 to 5 may feel like far too much. 7 to 4. Maybe they have little ones at home. Maybe they're caring for a parent or a grandparent. Maybe and you said this as well, maybe home life isn't good, or it's too stressful, so that they put in whatever their work day is. We don't know about this listener, but maybe the relationship, especially since, the sex drive issue, sometimes that can create a cycle of big disconnection. So maybe work doesn't feel good. Sounds like their friends aren't really getting, they're not really feeling connected to their friends because the friends don't get them. And then now the primary relationship, the romantic relationship, isn't feeling good. So that sounds to me like this person is not feeling supported, is having some stress in their romantic relationship, and doesn't sound like work. If they're losing focus, that wouldn't feel very good. So it may be that during their waking hours, they're not really getting a reprieve. And if they don't get a reprieve, then that stress just keeps carrying on. So thank you for asking us and the listeners to slow down and focus on not what other people are doing, but what you're doing and what areas feel good and healthy and what areas feel stress inducing. So thank you. That's incredible. It's so rich. So thank you.
You're welcome.
We're ready for more.
Yeah, well, and these are like the foundations, right? That like, why should, if that doesn't work for someone, why would they feel good? You know, on like a super fundamental level. So, I mean, one of my most favorite things to do is pull women out of work for 3 months, because it's even hard to know what's what. If you're just zooming along every day, where is there time for reflection? How do you know how you even really feel if you're just sort of constantly charging along? So once we talk about stress, the next place I go to is nutrition. And nutrition is food is our first medicine. So junk in, junk out. What is somebody eating? Are they meal skipping? Are they eating one meal a day? Are they eating a lot of processed food? Are they eating a lot of sugar? Are they eating a ton of carbohydrates? Are they drinking a lot of alcohol? What does it look like? Are they eating vegetables? Are they getting protein? Are they getting healthy fats? These these foods provide the biochemical substrate for the substances that we make in our body that make our body work. And we're either going to work well mechanically or not well. And are we supporting good function or are we stressing good function? There is also a lot about hormone balance and fiber and the importance of fiber as being crucial for healthy hormone detoxification. Is this woman pooping? Pooping is primary for estrogen detoxification. Like if somebody's constipated, first of all, why? Second of all, what's going on in their gut microbiome? Third of all, are they drinking enough water and moving their body enough? And then how might not eliminating be contributing to hormone imbalance because estrogen is detoxed in stool. If stool is sitting in our body, that estrogen is going to be resorbed back into the bloodstream. And just by the nature of not pooping, we are contributing to hormone imbalance.
Okay, so women, anybody listening, no matter your gender, if you're not pooping right, pay attention. And this, I actually didn't know. I know it's so important to have, our regular bowel movements for overall health. I had no idea what you're talking about with the reabsorption of hormones. I had no idea. It makes sense. It's still sitting in your system. So now I have a question. So if you're pooping out something, let's say there are toxins in your food or processed food that you've been eating, somebody who might have like a fast food kind of diet, would they also be reabsorbing some of those toxins if they don't have regular bowel movements?
That makes sense to me.
Oh, okay. Another reason, listeners, make sure you're pooping. Okay. Great conversation. So
I talk about poop a lot because I talk about gut health and digestion a lot for all of the reasons already stated. I do want to mention one more sort of juicy tidbit that not a lot of people are aware of, which is when there is bacterial overgrowth in our intestines, there can be elevations of an enzyme called beta-glucuronidase. And beta-glucuronidase can also bind estrogen and circulate it back into the bloodstream. So this is a gut hormone intersection, right? So when there's an overgrowth of bacteria in the intestines, that can contribute to hormone imbalance. Another reason why gut health is essential for everything. Yeah.
You are really doing a great job of emphasizing how important our gut is. I knew it was important, but I didn't quite have this level of understanding that I'm already getting. So thank you.
Yeah.
When we look at so let's talk about fiber for a minute because it's so important. So for people, I'm a vegetarian, so I tend to get plenty of fiber. For people who aren't vegetarians or people who may be vegetarians but maybe not getting a whole lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, what might you point them to, some people, I have a garden. Some people don't have, even a potted plant that they can, a pot where they can grow some fresh herbs. What would you recommend? I know there's a lot of talk about taking people of, teens on up, taking fiber supplements like Metamucil. What would you suggest as a primary source of fiber for somebody who's a bit on the go or not inclined to go to the store and purchase good fresh fruits and vegetables, or maybe they don't have access to them?
Yeah, I mean, I am always really encouraging people to eat food first before going to supplementation. And a lot of the reason that people don't go to food first is because they're too busy, which is part of the conversation, right? Or because they don't know how to cook some of these foods because they weren't foods that they grew up with, right? And so we talk about that. As in food groups, particularly for women, I'm always stressing the brassicas, which are broccoli, kale, collard, Brussels sprouts, foods, kale, collards, foods that not a lot of people necessarily have a lot of experience or palate with, but with online recipes and that sort of thing, I do sort of believe like if you can, I mean, our local health food store takes SNAP, which I love. So people with food on assistance can go to the health food
Mm-hmm.
they can buy. And a lot of our local farmers will also take food stamps. And so access, and I appreciate where I live is probably a little bit unique in that way. There is access here, but then there's like, do you have the time to cook it? And then what do you do with it if you don't know how? So there are resources for all of that. So I do recommend food first and as many vegetables as anybody can get in. In fact, that's part of the nutrition advice or guidance that I often will give people, which is if we never meet again and you walk away with one pearl from this encounter, my hope is that you will walk away and you understand the importance of eating as many vegetables as you can possibly get in your body in any given day. So, for someone who's on the fly, it's an interesting question. What would I recommend? I mean, I think I would probably recommend the vegetables that you can eat raw that require no preparation. So, I would be looking at, you know, the little baby cucumbers where you can just grab and eat, or baby carrots, or a radish, or snow peas, that you can just grab and eat raw, that you don't have to prepare in any way. I'm trying to think of like the rest stops. You know how now at the rest stops, you can get a hard boiled egg, you can get like a little hummus and cheese thing. And so
Yes.
I know the rest stops are trying, and I'm trying to think of like, what have I seen at the rest stops for vegetables other than pickles, which, not the worst choice. Better than nothing,
Better
right?
than nothing.
Better than nothing. And sometimes you just have to do what you can do and let it be enough. So maybe it's pickles. I'm not sure. I tend to stay away from, oh, what I would recommend would be something like a grocery store chia pudding. So you can buy chia pudding that's already made in some grocery stores. And chia seed is very high in fiber. It's also high in omega-3 fatty acids, which are super anti-inflammatory. So I would probably steer people toward chia pudding. And I would also steer them toward pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds, which are not vegetables, but are going to be high in fiber. Seeds are going to be high in fiber.
And thank you for pausing with that. So I've heard about chia seeds before, and there are those little gelatinous things, but so I'll give them a try. So I'll give them a second or third chance. And I love how you really paused to help listeners think about when you see like a smorgasbord of vegetables. Think about when you go to the grocery store, oh, would I like to try a little bit of cilantro? Would I like that red bell pepper? How would that taste cut up? And so give things a try, find out what feels portable to you or not. And even if you have a tiny backyard, this year is the first year I've grown kale. And I wanted to grow it because I'm aware that often if you're not buying it organic, there can be a lot of pesticides in it. Listeners, if you haven't heard of the Dirty Dozen, every year there's a Dirty Dozen that's published that tells you what top fruits and vegetables you need to buy organic, because the ones on that list are the ones that have the most pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, that sort of thing. And so and people often think that if you're buying organic, it's necessarily more expensive. And that's simply not true. I know when I shop, sometimes I'll buy organic carrots and they are exactly the price as you say, regular carrots. So I love how you invited that sense of playfulness. Look, play. I know in the grocery store I like to go to, I ask often, what's your freshest vegetable? Or could you tell me more about this one? And, you're the health department in your local, if it's a small community market, they often have really good employees who can tell you a lot about what something is high in or not. So ask questions, get curious. And I love how you said food is our first medicine. And many people were raised because that's what life offered for many decades. It's only recently that we're coming back to the awareness of whole foods. So there's no blame or shame here. But if you were raised on processed cereals, processed lunch, processed meats, this will sound like a very new, because it is easy. It is easy to get a box of mac and cheese or a can of whatever it is, or a microwave meal. But if you can just start working in one meal a day or one meal a week, even that's whole foods, it's actually a lot less complicated than you might think if you find the right recipes. What do you think, Carrie?
100%. And I think that it's really wise to take baby steps, to just like find that maybe one food that you're curious about and let that be the only new thing that you do that week. Because sustainable change doesn't happen in leaps and bounds. It happens one tiny moment at a time, and it often involves a lot of failure. So you might buy collard and be like, oh my gosh, that was terrible. And it might take another week or two or three before you have the courage to be like, okay, fine, I'm going to try kale and see what I can do with it, And this is how change is made, and it's work. Right?
It is work. It is work. And we can make it playful work if we enter into it. And it doesn't mean that, but I love how you brought up collard and kale. And you can even, if you have a neighbor that you're close to, say, do you want to split some kale with me? And that way, if you don't like it, you give it to them or something, so that you find playful ways of bringing in whole foods. Now, I'm assuming that listeners know what I'm saying when I say whole foods. Would you please explain what that means?
Yeah. I like to talk about whole foods as foods that we could hunt or gather. So if we were left to our own resources, there are foods that we could get from the natural world that don't need to be packaged in any way, right? So the other sort of guidance is to shop the perimeter of the grocery store. Primarily, it's not that you never have another tortilla chip or cracker. That's not what we're talking about here, right? But we're just talking about shifting the balance of some of that, where the tortilla chip is the exception and the fresh avocado is the norm, or whatever the case may be. The other tip that can be helpful for people in terms of fiber or just nutrition is this concept called Eat the Rainbow, which was, I think, coined by a woman named Deanna Munich. I believe she was the one who coined it. And she has a website with all kinds of resources on it about what is eating the rainbow and what foods are in each category. And it's this concept of trying to make sure that every day we eat some red foods, some orange foods, some yellow foods, some green foods, some blue foods. And I'm not talking about M&Ms, right? I'm talking about whole foods.
Blueberries,
purple potatoes, purple kale, collard, oranges, lemons, clementines, cherries, berries, red peppers, yellow peppers, green peppers, summer squash, zucchini, winter squash, acorn, butternut, kabocha, and just trying to make sure that, not that the skin on the squash matters, of course, but the point is eating foods that have diverse color exposes us to diverse phytonutrients, and that enhances our nutrition. And you can't get that. It's harder to get that and harder to assimilate it through a supplement. It's possible, but still, these nutrients were designed, evolved to be taken in within a complex, not necessarily isolated in a supplement form. So again, deciding that nutrition is medicine, deciding that it is worthy of some money and it's worthy of some time, and restructuring a week so that there is some time for food preparation. And it doesn't have to be complicated. Like when I talk to people, I'm like, get yourself a rotisserie chicken and salad in a bag. There you go. It's like fast food, but not quite. And sometimes that's the starting point. And
Absolutely.
that's going to be better than a frozen dinner that's probably got chemicals and a lot of carbohydrates and probably some sugar and some not awesome oils. And so really trying to be realistic. Realistic. And the other thing that I talk to people about is double and triple recipes. Nobody really wants to cook every night, or I should rephrase that. Not many people want to cook every night. And most modern people's schedules preclude that from even being an option, whether it's meetings or involvement or because we want to get to the gym and there's not time for both, whatever it is. So like doubling and tripling recipes. So there's leftovers for a lunch or two and another dinner or two, and then you're only cooking 2 or 3 things, and boom, you've got the week.
So it's absolutely wonderfully put. And we often forget. I was working with a client the other day who has a really busy lifestyle. And some of this really would apply to this person because they are fitting in so much. And then by the time the end of the day comes, they end up eating something sugary or packaged or whatever. And if they could, I'm trying to address a few of the components you're talking about with a no blame, no shame, baby stepping kind of approach. This individual could maybe say on a Sunday, set out some time to create a nice, batch of chili or something that could be vegetarian. It could have meat in it. And chili is something that's great to freeze, put in the refrigerator. Then, as you said, a prepackaged salad and then maybe a lasagna or something that is easy to create, done in an hour or two on a Sunday. Or if they're able to do this toward the end of the day or even in the morning, 1 or 2 days a week, and use that as meditative time. If they're not rushing and they see it as time to slow down and cook for themselves and make space for that, it could shift the game a little bit. It may not for somebody who's really high powered. Maybe they're better off going to the grocery store and getting, as you said, a pre-done chicken or something. But realizing there are lots of ways to play with it. But the end game is to take baby steps. If I'm hearing you right, take baby steps. Don't call yourself a failure if something's not working out. Try something else and start making these changes in your diet. I love how you said eat the rainbow. I'd never heard of that. That's fabulous, which also there's a lot of playfulness to that. And so take some play as you talk a lot about messiness and that it's okay for it to be a little bit messy and to not work, and find out what works for you. Look at your entire life as far as your work, your sleep, your stress levels, your relationships, to get a sense of not judging yourself, but what's going well, what's not going well. Where can I start making these little shifts? And so many times people say, oh yeah, but I take a probiotic or I take a prebiotic, and they think that will fix everything. But what I found, and what I've read, I haven't found this out, but I'm going to ask you, that a lot of times that the prebiotics and probiotics, whether they're being taken in pill form or in a drink, they're actually destroyed by the acids in the stomach before they're even absorbed. Is that accurate?
There is controversy around the benefit of a daily probiotic, and when I dive into it, I land on still advising people to take a probiotic because
Okay.
it's I spoke about the insufficiency dysbiosis that I see on
Yes.
testing and the prevalence of that. And the remedy to that, this brings us full circle back to the vegetables, right? So eating vegetables is going to be our best source of fiber. That fiber becomes the fuel for the cells in our colon, and that fiber gets digested and fermented by our microbiome into what are called short chain fatty acids. And those fatty acids are crucial for digestive wellness overall. And so, and then good bacterial colonization. That probiotic to me is like, it's just a little bit of insurance. It's like just doing a little bit of the work for us. And maybe that's because we're stressed, or because we had a cocktail or two, or because we had a piece of cake or ice cream, or we take pharmaceuticals, or any of the things that might diminish that good bacterial colonization. So that is the basis on which I make that recommendation. I feel a little bit like it's low hanging fruit in terms of insurance that we've got some good bacteria going on trying to keep things balanced.
Good, good. So that sounds fabulous. I have another question. It just came to me. When I know a lot of people, I'm not a big smoothie person, but I know a lot of people who are smoothie fans, and they take their protein and they put the kale in and the spinach in and the blueberries. Does that make a difference to the body, whether it's something that we chew or something that's already blended for us?
Mm. It's an interesting question, and it is true, right? Our digestion, some would say, starts with our eyes, right? And
Mm.
our nose, right? Because just looking and smelling food can begin our mouths to produce some of the enzymes that we need to begin to digest food. And then there's the action of chewing, actually chewing food as opposed to having it pureed for us. And
Mhm.
what happens when we chew? What happens to the enzymes in our what happens to our central nervous system in terms of like, oh, yay, the primitive brain is like,
Mm.
here it comes. I'm so happy. I'm going to get fed. And how does all of that mind and body affect digestion? I mean, it stands to reason in my mind that eating and chewing food is optimal. I also will make smoothies in the warm months. So I'm not anti-smoothie. I think it's can be a really amazing and tasty way to get nutrient density that takes work
Mm.
otherwise. Right? It's just like, if you can put your coconut milk and you can put your protein powder and your nut butter and your seed and your green vegetable and a few berries and like, boom, you're done. To put all of that on a plate and make it tasty would probably take more time and energy than just like, zooming it through the smoothie and zooming it through the blender. So I'm not anti-smoothie by any stretch, but I think that, and I say this to people, a part of nutrition guidance, which is like, you really don't want to be eating the same thing every day, even if it's healthy. So people come in and say, well, I have this every day, even if it's eggs and veggies, I have it every day. Not ideal. I really encourage people to have 3 or 4 different breakfasts, lunches, and dinners that they can then loop and rotate through.
And that makes perfect sense. I often think about ages ago, somebody had talked to me about how, our ancestors, they had the seasons of the year and they were often moving. So they weren't getting our systems. We still have our systems are still pretty much based on our more ancient biology, and our bodies are not used to having the same food. Our ancestors had winter vegetables available, spring, summer, different crops throughout the year, different meats that were more plentiful at certain times of the year. And so I agree with you. Having a lot of rotation as much as possible is probably really, really good for the body, and that makes perfect sense to me. So as we prepare to wind up, and I just love how you've addressed this listener's question in a way that I hadn't anticipated. I thought you were going to go into hormone replacement therapy.
Well,
I
I'm
did.
happy to do that. But we would need more time. We can have a conversation too.
Well, we'll have to have you back because I was really I was so interested in that. But what you offered us is something that is so much more relevant to people of every gender, because if we just, I mean, what you're saying makes so much sense.
Well, it's like
Yeah.
you have to shore up the foundation first.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to. I work with people to try and shore up their foundation first to the extent that they feel able. And then once they've done what they can in that regard, if they're still not where they want to be, then we talk about hormone therapy. And I will also say that I will talk about hormone therapy. I mean, plenty of women come in and are like, this is what I want. And which is completely fine. I'm about supporting people taking care of themselves the way they want. But I am very sure to tell them, if they're living a bonkers life and they're not taking care of themselves in any way, it is unlikely that the hormone therapy is going to get them entirely where they want to go.
Well, thank you, because one of my big takeaways, and I hope that the listener who wrote in and all the other listeners, you've given me a huge reminder of the importance of looking at your life, body, mind, spirit, and paying attention to where stress is leaking into your life, and focusing on how in today's world, stress is one of the biggest enemies to emotional health, mental health, physical health, overall health. And so thank you for that reminder, that wake up call. And to the listener who wrote in, I love how you were saying, start looking at the foundation, check your relationships, check your work, pay attention to your food, pay attention to your stress level. Then, and also check in with their doctor to have a full workup done. But then by starting with having a healthy foundation of, healthy living, then maybe they can see what symptoms disappear, if their focus gets better, if their sex drive gets better, if they just feel, I don't know about the skin, but skin is affected by what we eat for sure. So it makes sense. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I do want to also just be really clear and say that some women feel so terrible that addressing their life is not possible. And sometimes starting with hormone therapy and taking the edge off, so to speak, gives them sort of like the leg up. I don't know how else to talk about it. To be like, right. So let's say, for example, someone isn't sleeping, right? It is really hard to exercise if you are tired because you're not sleeping, right? And so that's a good example where sometimes starting with hormone therapy so that someone can sleep, so that they then have better energy, so that they can then deal with their food and move their body, right? And so it's not always it's very rarely a linear process, but I want to emphasize how much our life influences our hormone balance and how we feel, increasingly so with age. And so I will use hormone therapy as a tool to help someone take the edge off so that they can then look at their life and figure out where can I modify here? What can I do? How can I support myself? So it's not necessarily an either or scenario.
And thank you for emphasizing that, because it is a piece that we didn't have time to talk about today, but the importance of sleep and progesterone in particular at bedtime. Not giving medical advice here, but I'm following what you're saying, particularly before bedtime can for some people do such just that alone can be a game changer. So we don't know what the individual's sleep routine is like because it wasn't mentioned. But when we have a deficit of sleep, it does affect sex drive, cognition. It affects, our bowels. It affects everything. So sleep is so critical here. Oh my goodness, Carrie, you have so much information to offer. I'm going to have to listen to this episode a few times to take it in. So thank you. And I'll have to have you back to discuss HRT with us. That would be lovely.
Let's do it.
Okay.
I can talk about that too, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carrie, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah, Instagram, Facebook, the World Wide Web, LinkedIn, carrielevine.cnm on all those channels. Not TikTok, not Threads.
Okay. And the spelling on Carrie's name, listeners, is Carrie, CarrieLevine. Please don't worry about any of this because especially if you're driving, don't try to write anything down. This will all be in the show notes. So you'll be able to find links to Carrie's website and socials. And I'll also look up that research that we talked about. So it's plugged in there. And my goodness, again, Carrie, thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom with us today. It's been such a delight.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. And to our listeners, thank you, as always, for sharing your time, energy, and journey with us. It's such a pleasure. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And, as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.